everyone. Today we're looking at the very last parts of Station 11, these two really short sections, by way of comparison anyway to the rest of the book. They're short sections, The Prophet, and the same title as the book, Station 11. So we'll be looking at that in just a moment. I'm going to let my students file in, though, give them some time to get in the room. Yeah. Feeling pretty mellow today, tired from the week. I think everybody's probably feeling exhausted. So conversations I keep having with people. I actually had a request the other day from a family member. Do you have a copy of Stephen King's The Stand? And the one that I would loan out is sadly at work. I have a copy behind me on the table. It's actually the unedited version. I tracked down an original paperback of The Stand before King exploded it and put in all the deleted scenes, as it were, once the editors could not stop him anymore. One of these days I'm going to read it again and see if I think it's better than the unedited version. I think King was better when he was young and had an editor who could tell him what to include and what not to include. And then he got really popular and he created It. And It was just a bloated monstrosity of a novel. Loved the movie, by the way, the recent film versions. But the book was just massive. And it was about the same time that they released the unedited version of The Stand, which is another somewhat bloated novel, I think. I know there's people who love it and people who like Stephen King in a way that borders on religious fanaticism, but I'm not one of those people. I read a lot of King when I was a teenager. King was hugely popular when I was in my teens. So, I grew up with King, but I don't have a religious awe for his writing. He's good. He's a great storyteller. Just, long-winded. All right. I think 2 minutes of ramble is about enough time to make sure that everybody's here as I begin talking about the finale to Station 11. As I was rereading this section, I was struck by both Feldner and Mendez Garcia, these two articles that we've been looking at this semester, saying that Emily St. John Mandel's Apocalypse is less explicitly violent. It's not that violence doesn't occur. I think some of my students misunderstand when they say that these works are less violent. They're comparing them to works like the ones behind me. They're like The Road or I Am Legend or especially Mad Max. I think particularly of Mad Max in the last section of Station 11, as we hit that section, The Prophet, where we get this plot resolution of Kirsten and August on the road trying to get to the Severn City Airport, and the Prophet finally tracks them down. And there's this altercation, and in that altercation, the Prophet dies. And somebody might say, well, that seems awfully violent. I mean, there's a moment when Kirsten kills one of the Prophet's men. This is on page 286. Kirsten wrenched her knife from the archer's chest. He gasped, the blood welling, and she heard a gurgle in his throat as his eyes dimmed. 3, she thought, and felt immediately tired. Of course, that's a reference to the knife tattoos, which we are going to come back to in just a little while, because one of your classmates had I thought it was a brilliant observation as a response to Mendez Garcia's assertion that no one in Emily St. John Mandel's Apocalypse creates art. That we don't have people creating art, and we can push back and say, no, there's people creating art in the aftermath. Some of you noted that, Miranda made Station 11. Isn't that new art? Yeah, and that's in Station 11, but it's not. It's not in the post-apocalypse. She doesn't create it in the post-apocalypse because she doesn't survive the apocalypse. So we can't really point to Station 11 as an instance of new art. But we, I'll just jump ahead. I might as well. I'm well down this little digression. But your classmate noted that tattoos are a form of art. And I was like, what? That was so great. It was one of those moments where I'm like, wow. I think I've often said to you, or I say this to my students frequently, that I get an opportunity when research papers are particularly good, I get taught. My students teach me. And I felt like in that moment there was this great experience that we get when we read a book together, and that can be in a classroom, or it can be in a book club, might just be discussing a book over social media. But when we sort of throw our ideas out into the void, and other people can go, oh, hey, I'd never considered it from that point of view. And we want to be careful, of course. We want to stop and say, well, let me consider this. How important are tattoos to Emily St. John Mandel, Station 11? Well, they're pretty important. Now, the art of the tattoo isn't. Like, we don't get a lurid description of Kirsten's tattoos, but we do get an awful lot of referencing to those tattoos. They are a recurring motif, and we can't ignore that's here in this text. Whether Emily St. John Mandel meant for that to be construed as art is immaterial. To create a tattoo is art. It is a form of art. And when she gets to the Severn City Airport, she has to say, is there somebody here, a tattooist? Is there someone who can do that form of art? Is what's being asked there. So new art is being created in the apocalypse if we will stretch our idea of what we would include as art. And when I think about, Mendez Garcia's assertion that, Shakespeare is too highbrow, it's too white, would tattoos be too low? Would they be too common? Why didn't she consider those as art? I mean, and a scholar's never going to get it all. I don't think Mendez Garcia is she's not a fool. She's not an idiot. She's a scholar. She's working hard on thinking about these things. But her approach is flawed in some ways, and we can come back at her. And we can disagree with her. What we talked about the other day with inserting a naysayer into our text, and maybe the paper becomes about art and violence via Kirsten's tattoos. I don't know what conclusion we'd come to, but the fact that I think we hear more about the fact that she has the tattoos, that she regrets the tattoos, than we do, then we get like really explicit scenes of the reasons why she got the tattoos. And you might say, well, come on, Dr. Prashant, on page 295, chapter 50, we get the reveal. We find out why Kirsten has those tattoos. Mm-hmm. How explicit are those scenes? And bringing it back to the encounter on the road with the prophet, how brutal is the violence? Remember, this is a post-apocalyptic world. The violence can be as brutal as you like, right? These films right here. World War Z can be pretty brutal. The Stand by Stephen King, pretty brutal. What do we get in Station 11? Is it as brutal as these other works? And that's, again, why I stacked these comparative short stories, films against Station 11 so that you could look at them as comparative instances. Go back to the beginning of the course. Is the reveal of the apocalypse, this virus, as intense as the movie Contagion? I think if we do a close read of both of those things, we conclude no. What unity of effect is Emily St. John Mandel going for? And what unity of effect is the filmmaker Steven Soderbergh arguably going for? He's going for fear in Contagion. What do we get in Station 11, the theater? I don't think it's fear. If we feel that that's an intense work, it may simply be that we don't have other instances to compare it to. Maybe our usual diet of narratives is a lot softer. but you have had comparative texts to look at next to this one. So if we go to the scene where the prophet dies, this is on page 302 and 303, he's got Kirsten down on the ground and he's going to kill her. But it's too late for that, the prophet said. He drew in his breath and adjusted his grip on the rifle. And this is right at the bottom of this page, which is fabulous because we scan ahead. I don't know if you know this, but our eye will scan ahead when we read. So it's very hard for a book to fully surprise us unless the reveal happens when we turn the page. You remember when we were talking about Calvin and Hobbes, at the way in which Bill Watterson constructed the strip series in the way that we looked at, you had to turn the page for the reveal of some of the jokes in the one that we looked at. In the same way, if you could have the reveal that and then it happened after you turn the page, you couldn't scan ahead, but our eye does scan ahead. We'll even jump to the other side of the page. We'll jump over and we're almost unaware that we're doing this. But it wouldn't matter because if our eye scanned over, all you would see is the shot was so loud. I'd love it though if, you could have that his grip on the rifle at the bottom of this page, and then you'd have to turn it before you could see the shot was so loud. It's one of the things that, when people talk about the differences between books and movies and say the book is always better than the movie, I'm like, but movies can do things that books can't do. That's not a evaluative statement. That doesn't mean these are better. It doesn't mean movies are better. It means they do different things. And if a movie ever gets made of Station 11, the audience will be able to be surprised by what happens next in a way that the book couldn't quite achieve. We can have a jump scare in a movie. You can't create a jump scare in a book. You can be surprised, but you can't be like, good, right? So he adjusts his grip on the rifle, and we as the reader are ready. This is, Kirsten's going to be shot. The shot was so loud that she felt the sound in her chest. Look at how Emily St. John Mandel is not letting us know what's happened yet. A thud by her heart. Oh my God, she's been shot in the chest. The boy was in motion, and she wasn't dead. Oh, good. The shot hadn't come from the prophet's rifle. She makes it clear now. She lets us know we're okay. We're okay. In the fathomless silence that followed the sound, she touched her fingertips to her forehead and watched the prophet fall before her, the rifle loose in his hands. The boy had shot the prophet in the head. Now, he shoots the prophet in the head, but we don't get brains spattered all over the place or like bone chunks and fragments. It's not explicit. We're surprised that he's dead. This has not been a gory moment. It's not a brutal, violent moment. Now, let's contrast that with the death of the prophet in Mad Max. When Furiosa kills Immortan Joe in Mad Max Fury Road, it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. She crawls up alongside the vehicle, remember me, hooks his mask, rips his face off. Now, it's pretty quick. You don't see it in the kind of gory detail that you would say in a slasher movie. The remake of The Evil Dead, incredibly gory. Mad Max Fury Road, brutal. Brutal in a way that we cannot say Station 11 is. So if you're thinking about your last paper, and you're thinking about how you're going to synthesize what Mendez Garcia and Feldner are saying, there's a moment of synthesis. They agree that this is a book that, unlike these traditional apocalyptic works, is not focused on violence, and the characters are not defined by violence. That's Kirsten and the tattoos. She's not defined by violence. Has she committed violent acts? Yes. But let's think about Charlize Theron as analog to Kirsten, female in the apocalypse. How many knife tattoos would Furiosa have just by the end of the movie? Never mind what she'd done in the past. She is a character defined by violence. Max is a character defined by violence. Now, the movie has an arc where they become less defined by violence by the end of it. He's absolutely feral at the beginning of the movie, can hardly utter language, and mostly grunts and expresses in monosyllables. And by the end of the movie, he has a name again. He remembers his name. I always love that scene because it feels like Tom Hardy is like remembering. It's like as he's playing Max, he's like, Max remembering, my name is Max. And then he nods as though it's like, yeah, that's me. You know, and it humanizes him in that moment. But up until that point, I mean, like, they're killers. They live in a world that is red in tooth and claw. And if we had to tally up all the kills, you know, Furiosa's getting a full sleeve of tattoos, and then another sleeve over here, and then her back. So, you know, before you accuse Emily St. John Mandel of being violent, which some of you have, you said, well, there's death runs right through this book. Yeah, but how does she treat it? How does she deal with it? Is it the focus? Or is it something that happens and then the focus is sorrow or regret or a desire to move on from those things? And what is the majority of the world like? I mean, the prophet seems to be the exception, not the rule. Whereas in Mad Max Fury Road or the movie The Road or the book The Road by McCormack McCarthy, violence and brutality are the norms, and kindness and these moments of stillness. People like Jeevan acting as a doctor in the post-apocalypse, those are the rule for Emily St. John Mandel, but they wouldn't be in these other works. And those are the things that we want to keep in mind as you're working on this last paper. So, you know, that's one of the reasons that the instructions for the assignment, which you can find in our course outline on Blackboard, says that you can include references to some of the other primary works that we've looked at, because it's those comparative moments that can illuminate some of the things that are going on in Station 11, and the way in which it is distinct, the way in which it is different. So they say, I say, those three positions that we can have. We can say yes to an argument, we can say no to an argument, or we can have this middle position where we say, okay, but they say, I say, stresses that we have to be able to bring something to the table, something new. We don't just say yes, or we don't just say no. Don't just say, I agree with Feldner. You say, I agree with Feldner. This is a book that is less explicitly violent. And then we can demonstrate that with a scene like the one in The Prophet by comparing it with Mad Max Fury Road. So that's just not only a discussion of the book, but also a way of giving you an illustration of how you might use the primary text of Station 11 in your argument. Like, you don't, you know, I was thinking about this morning because I was looking at one of the sources that I made available to you all on Blackboard, and it's the article by the fellow whose last name is Bergeron, and it's called The Art of Not Dying, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel and Oscar de Profundis by Catherine Mavrakakis. And near the end, he has this subheading about Canadian writing, which was intriguing to me, the disappearance of Canada. And it got me wondering whether or not, you know, would we have the potential? Please don't write an essay about this, because you'd be starting from scratch. But I feel like there was this moment of wondering, like, is Station 11 this soft apocalypse because it was written by a Canadian? That's the question that ran through my head. To some degree, Bergeron's response is no, because Mavrakakis, as Bergeron says, reveals a certain pessimism in her work. But near the end of the article, he says Mandel offers optimism. So there's that echo, right? Mandel shows, this is Bergeron. Mandel shows several characters preoccupied not only with preserving, but also with transmitting humanity's heritage. And I want to go with that transmission thing for just a moment. Ask anyone who works in curating in museums. It's not just putting stuff together. It is an act of creativity. We might say it's an art form. There is certainly an artistry to a good museum exhibit. So the transmission of humanity's heritage is a moment of artistry. If the traveling symphony, which Mendez Garcia spends so much time with, and their performance of Shakespeare is an act of creativity, it too is a moment of new creativity when we consider the way in which they interpret it, the way in which they choose their costumes. And to some degree, we have to go a little bit outside the text to perhaps our own experience here. But if you were to look at productions of Shakespeare's work, it's not always the same. There's always that moment of the actor embodying the performance. One of my favorite theoretical texts about adaptation theory. So when we adapt a work, like a book made into a movie, talks about how actors embody the characters in ways that act as a moment of adaptation, where that actor is adapting that character, never mind the rest of the film or the play. And that with plays, almost every performance is a different act of that embodiment. So, you know, there is something new going on in the transmission. It's not just preservation, but transmission and ultimately performance that's going on. And I think Mendez Garcia passes over that rather quickly. But to move on, the traveling symphony goes to peaceful colonies to spread music and Shakespeare's theater. Clark Thompson becomes the conservator of a museum of civilization which spontaneously developed at the Sky Miles Lounge at the Severn City Airport. Francois Diallo at New Petoskey takes care of a library and a newspaper, and that too is a moment of art, right? To craft journalism is a creative moment. I mean, not think of it in art as the same way that we would with Shakespeare, but I think that it's still a reiteration of the theme: survival is insufficient. And then at Traverse City, people have restored electricity. Spoiler, but we're going to get there in just a moment. And work to restore the internet. The novel takes place, Bergeron says, the novel takes place in a moment of hope. Now, we might find an article like that and go, aha, more of the same. I've got more people who say what I've already been arguing, you know, because that's what Feldner and Mendez Garcia agree about. So now Bergeron says it too, and we go, 3 sources, I'm done. No, you're not. What do you say? It's they say, I say. They say, you say. Mendez Garcia says this, Feldner says this, Bergeron says this. What do you say? And it doesn't have to be something different from what they say. You can agree with what they say. Chapter 4, yes, no, okay, but 3 ways of responding. But don't just stack your sources' claims. Don't just be like secondary source, secondary source, secondary source. There you go. Not in an English course. In an English course, you got to demonstrate you read the book or the short story or watch the film, whatever it might be. I don't just want you parroting what others have said. That's not the point of a research paper. You have to come into conversation with this and find places where there are maybe gaps in their argument. Like it might be that you say, I agree with Feldner, but he hasn't considered this. And that's why I brought up that tattoo thing. One of the reasons that what that student had done was brilliant is because I've never come across that argument. So Feldner, Mendez Garcia, the focus on culture and memory. And then we just go, just culture. Let's just think about culture. But it could be culture and memory through those tattoos, because those tattoos are both, right? They're culture, they're art, and they're memory. They're a way for Kirsten to be reminded. And not in a way that's like, I'm so awesome, I killed a bunch more people. She feels sorrow about it. But that was that student going, I'm gonna add to this argument. They say this, I say this. And not just, I say it, here's my opinion, it's just as valid as anyone else's. No. Your informed opinion. Remember that quote I had from Harlan Ellison? No one is entitled to their opinion. You're entitled to your informed opinion. We want informed opinions, not just here's what I think about Station 11 if you haven't read the book, or if you haven't read the whole book, or if you haven't really considered, like you read it once, you read the section that you're writing about once, go back and read it again. Think about it. Consider it in new ways. That's one of the things that I'm going to be looking for with this last paper. So the prophet dies in this moment of violence, but not necessarily brutal violence. And Kirsten finds somebody finds and they give to her a book, this Bible, right? August gives her this Bible that was the prophet's, and there's this page torn from a copy of Station 11, this fake comic book, or this fictional comic book in Station 11. And she's stunned by this. This is connection. And we may have already pieced this together as the reader if we're paying close attention. We may have already figured out who he really is, right? And when we get into the last section, or the last chapters of the section called The Prophet, we get what feels like it could have been the ending to the novel, where Clark takes Kirsten up, into this tower where he's got this telescope, and tells her to take a look. And this is on page 311. And so they're up in the air traffic control tower. The telescope. He stepped back. The telescope's focused, he said. Don't move it, just look through. Kirsten looked, but at first she couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. She stepped back. It is impossible, she said. But there it is. Look again. In the distance, pinpricks of light arranged into a grid. There, plainly visible on the side of a hill some miles distant, a town or a village whose streets were lit up with electricity. Now, I always think when I read that, or I'm listening to it as an audiobook, I'm like, could have ended right there, but she doesn't. We find out what happens to Jeevan. We get another moment with Jeevan. We find out that the traveling symphony arrives at the Severn City Airport. But it could have ended with just electricity. They could have even, she could have organized it so that the traveling symphony shows up, and then Clark says, hey, why don't we go up to the air traffic control tower and I'll show you something. And then the novel could have ended there, but that's not how she did it. She moves on to section 9, titled Station 11, which begins with the words, on his last morning on Earth, Arthur was tired. And we are rocketed all the way back to the introduction of this book. And I use the word introduction rather than the first chapter to remind you of something that I said in my video on intros and conclusions, which is that it's a really good strategy to echo your introduction in your conclusion. It makes your reader think back through everything that they've just experienced in reading your argument. Fiction writer uses it as in this case, as a way of making us reach back and think about everything that we've read to this point. So we're back with Arthur, and we're there on the day that he dies. So this is before he goes up on stage and has his heart attack, and Jeevan jumps up on stage and tries to revive him. And we get Arthur in his dressing room on page 323. 15 minutes, the stage manager called from just outside the door. Thank you, 15, Arthur said, and began running his lines from the beginning. At our eldest born speak first. He glanced at his watch. It was still only 6 a.m. in Israel, but he knew Tyler and Elizabeth got up early. He negotiated his way past his ex-wife. 2 minutes, Elizabeth. I know he's getting ready for school. I just want to hear his voice. And closed his eyes to listen to the rustling of the telephone being transferred into his son's small hands. My eldest born, my only born, my heart. Why are you calling? That suspicious little voice. He remembered that Tyler was angry with him. I wanted to say hello. Then why aren't you here for my birthday? Arthur had promised to be in Jerusalem for Tyler's birthday, but he'd made that promise 10 months ago and had frankly forgotten about it until Tyler had called him yesterday. Arthur's apologies hadn't landed. I can't be there, buddy. I would if I could, but Aren't you coming to New York soon? Won't I see you next week? A fateful plane voyage that will end Tyler up with his mother at the Severn City airport. I guess. Did you read those comic books I sent you? And if we don't know, we're getting it now. Those comic books I sent you, we know that Arthur was given copies by Miranda. He gave copies to Kirsten, and he's clearly given copies to his son. Yeah, 10 minutes. The stage manager stood at the door. Thank you, 10. I looked at the comic books, Arthur said, but I don't think I completely understand them. Or sorry, what they were about. I was hoping maybe you could explain them to me. What about them? Well, tell me about Dr. 11. He lives on a space station. Really? A space station? It's like a planet, but a little planet, Tyler said. Actually, it's sort of broken. It went through a wormhole, so it's hiding in deep space, but its systems were damaged. So on its surface, it's almost all water. He was warming to his subject. All water! Arthur raised his head. It had been a mistake to let Tyler get so far from him, but perhaps the mistake wasn't unfixable. So they live in the water, Dr. 11 and his people? They live on islands. They have a city that's all made of islands. There's like bridges and boats, but it's dangerous because of the seahorses. The seahorses are dangerous? They're not like the seahorses we saw in the jar in Chinatown that one time. They're big. And I have a note on the side of the page here. The prophet wasn't always the prophet. Terminal language, the concept of terminality in Station 11, moving from one moment to another. That the world hasn't ended, just the world of light and electricity, the world pre-Georgia flu. That's the world that ends in Station 11. But other worlds end too. Miranda's world with her artist boyfriend ends, and her life, her world with Arthur begins. But that life ends too, and LA was over, right? Los Angeles was over in another life. We get this phrase every now and again, in another life. We don't live multiple lives, but it's a way, it's a metaphor that we use. It's poetic language that we use to convey that things have changed, and they've changed in a significant way. I'm not who I was when I was 20 or 10 or 30 or even 40. I'm who I am now. And along the journey of my life, I've had moments that changed me significantly. And I can say that my world, the world that existed before that moment, it ended and something new began. That's the apocalyptic genre, the post-apocalyptic genre. That's what Feldner says. He says we get the apocalyptic event, but then we get what happened after, but we also get what happened before. And there's this sense of the terminal there, not just the ending, not just terminal as adjective, but terminal as noun, this space of comings and goings. And the man shot on the road in the year 20 is the prophet. But he wasn't always the prophet. And this changes how we feel about his death, I think. I think it's meant to. I think the reason Emily St. John Mandel waits until after the prophet's death to reveal this is so that we have that moment of, oh, good, they killed him. But there's something so deeply sad about what comes next. In Arthur's memory, or I should say in the novel's memory, really. I mean, Arthur's not remembering this, he's died. But he is having this moment of regret through memory, right? That he should not have let his son go. He should have been there for him. And they continue this conversation. And in this conversation, we come to these lines on page 325. What happens if a seahorse catches you? Then it pulls you under, Tyler said, and then you belong to the undersea. The undersea? It's an underwater place. He was talking fast now, caught up. They're Dr. 11's enemies, but they're not really bad. They just want to go home. That hits me every time. that this novel is not only hopeful about the future of humanity, but about people who would be like the prophet. I don't know how hopeful any of you are about people like the prophet, multiple wives, child wives. He's like a cult leader. How can we be hopeful for those people? This feels like the voice of Emily St. John Mandel, not just the voice of Tyler. Because to put those words in a child's mouth just pages after the demise of the book's villain, it's worth noting. They're Dr. Eleven's enemies, but they're not really bad. They just want to go home. And I'm going to probably lose it here on camera and get myself together. Buddy, Arthur said, "Tyler, I want you to know that I love you." The silence was so loud that he would have thought he'd lost the connection if not for the sound of a passing car. The boy must be standing by an open window. "You too," Tyler said. It was difficult to hear him. His voice was so small. This is the prophet, before he's the prophet. Terminality, terminal language, comings and goings, one world ending and another beginning. Tyler's world is about to end and the prophet's world will begin. The way that Emily St. John Mandel rounds this out on page 327 is like writing a good conclusion. It's bringing closure to the themes that she's been exploring throughout this novel, culture and memory. As Arthur stands on stage to perform King Lear, page 327, he found he was a man who repented almost everything, regrets crowding in around him like moths to a light. This was actually the main difference between 21 and 51, he decided, the sheer volume of regret. He had done some things he wasn't proud of. If Miranda was so unhappy in Hollywood, why hadn't he just taken her away from there? We probably wondered that as readers. It wouldn't have been difficult. The way he dropped Miranda for Elizabeth and Elizabeth for Lydia and let Lydia slip away to someone else. The way he'd let Tyler be taken to the other side of the world. The way he'd spent his entire life chasing after something, money or fame or immortality or all of the above. He didn't even really know his only brother. How many friendships had he neglected until they'd faded out? On the first night of previews, he'd barely made it off the stage. On the second night, he'd arrived on the platform with a strategy. So playing Lear has made him think about these regrets, but he has this strategy for how he prepares as he stands on stage. He stared at his crown and ran through a secret list of everything that was good. The pink magnolias in the backyard of the house in Los Angeles. Outdoor concerts, the way the sound rises up into the sky. Tyler in the bathtub at 2. Laughing in a cloud of bubble bath. Elizabeth in the pool at night, at the beginning before they'd ever had a single fight. The way she dove in almost silently, the double moons on the surface breaking into shards. Dancing with Clark when they were both 18, their fake IDs in their pockets, Clark flickering in the strobe lights. Miranda's eyes, the way she looked at him when she was 25 and still loved him. His third wife, Lydia, doing yoga on the back patio in the mornings. The croissants at the cafe across the street from his hotel. Tanya sipping wine, her smile. Riding in his father's snowplow when he was 9. The time Arthur told a joke about his father. I told a joke and his father and his little brother couldn't stop laughing. The sheer joy he'd felt at that moment. Tyler. When Feldner and Mendez Garcia talk about this being a hopeful book, they're doing it in comparison to these other works, these post-apocalyptic works. But they haven't talked about this scene. You can. That's for you to do. That's your primary evidence. You can take what I do in these lectures, I've told you this before, and use those to construct your own arguments. Be careful here. Remember, the map is not the territory. Nothing in here proves that this is the way things are. Like, I can read something that reads me, that resonates with me, obviously resonates with me. I think about my own kids when I read this passage, and that's why I get very sad. Not because they're still part of my life, but it's just it's love, and joy and hope. But I can echo Arthur a little bit in that idea that, between 21 and 51, the main difference is the sheer volume of regret. Yeah, I get that. But is that true for everyone? No. There's probably people who reach 50 and don't feel the sheer volume of regret. So I can't look at this and go, well, clearly we can see that all we need to all do is do what Arthur does in this scene and just go through a litany of a secret list of everything that was good. That's a great approach to life. I mean, I read a quote by Tony Robbins this morning. Somebody posted it on Instagram. And it reminded me of a line from, of all things, of course, it's me, Star Wars, The Phantom Menace. When Qui-Gon Jinn says to Anakin Skywalker, your focus determines your reality. Does it? Like, if I just have a good enough attitude, COVID-19 goes away? No. But here in the art, here in the representation, we might choose this. This is the thing about art, is that we get to choose the lens that we will view reality through. I think we choose particular stories. It was like I was talking about the other day. Sometimes we self-medicate through narrative. I had a bad day. I know exactly what narrative I need. Right? I need to watch a romantic comedy. I need to, for me, it's oddly, I want to watch this crap. I want to see the world end. When I'm in a really, really bad mood, Mad Max Fury Road. That's one of my comfort food movies. But we know what kind of narratives we want. And I think the reason that I want Mad Max Fury Road isn't for its dystopic elements or for its moments of violence necessarily, but the moment that stands out to me as the reason I love that movie so much. There's two scenes, but one in particular that I'll share with you now is when Max is hanging off the side of the truck and Furiosa's got him, but she's got that thing stuck in her side and it looks like all hope is lost. And the music's even telling you all hope is lost. It's a great, great bit of cinema. The way that scene is cut, we lose hope right before Furiosa swings him up and he gets an extra kick from one of the war boys, Nux, and he's able to jump onto one of the cars and things turn around and things get good. And that makes me feel better. I have a moment where I go, oh, and it just lifts me up. And people say, well, it's just a story. Yeah, but the emotion that was created by the story is real. And once we have our emotional center rejigged, that becomes reality for us. If we feel joy, our body responds to the stimulus that created that to produce, I don't know, because I'm not a psychologist, right? But it's a chemical thing. There's chemicals involved. It's a physiological thing. Your body gets involved and it's real. And so when we watch these stories that can affect us in very real ways, I can go on and on about the map not being the territory, but that's as a way of making sure that we don't overstate the argument that a piece of fiction can work in us, but we can't deny its effect. We can't deny its emotional impact for us. And at the end of Station 11, my emotional response, as you saw, and that was not put on, is I start tearing up. I get weepy. I want to cry. I feel joy over knowing that Arthur was okay when he died. First thing that happens in the book, we've known Arthur's been dead since page 1. And here I get to find out that he was okay. And that lifts me in some way. Even finding out that the prophet wasn't always a terrible person is somehow redemptive. It is this thing that speaks to the possibility of things getting better, which is how this novel ends. Not just once with the lights of that city, but twice with the very last pages with Clark thinking about what's going on. And he says, what became of Miranda? He hasn't thought of her in so long. All these ghosts. She went into shipping, he remembers. We know what happened to Miranda. Clark looks up at the evening activity on the tarmac, at the planes that have been grounded for 20 years, the reflection of his candle flickering in the glass. He has no expectation of seeing an airplane rise again in his lifetime. But is it possible that somewhere there are ships setting out? If there are again towns with streetlights, if there are symphonies and newspapers, then what else might this awakening world contain? And there too, I think right in that line, I feel like there's a response to Mendez Garcia there as well. No, there isn't a lot of art that's been created by these people in this book. But this book doesn't contain all of the stories of the world that Emily St. John Mandel has imagined. And we get that echo of Jorge Luis Borges, the Garden of Forking Paths. What other trajectories lie out there beyond the pages of the novel? And we can imagine those things. Symphonies and newspapers, then what else might this awakening world contain? Well, it will contain other culture and memory and art and hope, probably, because it's Emily St. John Mandel's apocalypse. That doesn't mean that in the real world, if the world ends in the way that Emily St. John Mandel imagines, that it will happen just like this. No, this is her map. This is her representation. But we can get in there and it feels very real to us, doesn't it? It's one of the greatest things about narrative. Perhaps vessels are setting out even now, traveling towards or away from him. Towards or away, it's terminal language again, the comings and the goings. Steered by sailors armed with maps and knowledge of the stars, driven by need or perhaps simply by curiosity, whatever became of the countries on the other side. If nothing else, it's pleasant to consider the possibility. And there's fiction. If nothing else, it's pleasant to consider the possibility. I feel like that is I don't think it's Emily St. John Mandel meaning for it to be a commentary on fiction, but it's pleasant to imagine, to consider all the possibilities that literature affords us, that fiction affords us. We can imagine what it would be like for the world to end, but not have the world really end. We can imagine what it's like to have relational worlds end, but not necessarily have our own relational worlds end. And yet at the same time, perhaps derive comfort from a book that talks about these things happening while it may well be happening to us. He likes the thought of ships moving over the water towards another world just out of sight. I'm going to leave the lecture on that. It feels like the mic drop moment. I'm going to hang around for a few moments, though, if you have questions about the paper as we move into the weekend. When will we be back for this? We're going to talk about WALL-E, the Disney movie, the Pixar movie, on Wednesday of next week. So same bat time, same bat channel, 10 a.m. next week on Wednesday. WALL-E. So even people who aren't part of my class can get in on that if you've got Disney Prime. Disney Prime? Did I just say Disney Prime? It's Disney Plus. I'm thinking about Amazon Prime because there's a new TV show launching on there's a new TV show launching on Prime today, on Amazon Prime, called Tales from the Loop, and it's based on artwork by a Swedish painter named Simon Stalenhag. You're welcome. I didn't let you join. You just came by. My sister was here today watching. I feel like Michael Bublé. That's so random, right? Why do you feel like Michael Bublé? Because when I saw him live last time he was in Edmonton, and there was a moment at which somebody handed him a phone, and he just walked around on stage with his phone doing selfies and showing people, like filming people up on stage, and we're thinking like, wow, who is the lucky person who, whose phone that is? Well, turns out that it was a phone that one of his entourage had, or maybe it was his own phone, but he was like FaceTiming basically with his sister. So it was a way to let his sister, be there for concerts. So my sister was here today, and that was cool. Now we've ruined Station 11 for her, sadly. But this Tales from the Loop show that's starting on Amazon Prime today is based on the Swedish painter Simon Stalenhag's work, and he does this thing where he paints really normal landscapes which look incredibly familiar to people who live in Alberta, because the topography of Sweden is very Albertan. When I was in Sweden a few years back, I commented on, I'm like, the trees look alarmingly like Albertan trees. And he said, well, that's because we got seeds from Canada, and we have the same kind of trees that you do in Alberta here when they reforested Sweden. So it looks an awful lot like, and they get snow like we do. And so if you get a chance, you should maybe check out Tales from the Loop. It looks like it's going to be really great. But who knows? A lot of people are going like, oh, it's just Amazon's ripoff of Stranger Things. And it's like, no, Simon Stalenhag did his art before Stranger Things came out. And besides which, it's all dipping into a similar pool. We've talked about intertextuality this semester, and how all these different works are dipping into a similar pool of ideas and motifs and drawing from those. And I mean, Emily St. John Mandel does the whole Shakespeare and the post-apocalypse in a way that is so reminiscent of The Postman. And I was convinced she had to have seen that. It's like, oh, she ripped off The Postman. No, as it turned out, she didn't. She was just dipping into a similar pool of intertextual motifs and drawing out some of the same stuff. And I think Tales from the Loop will be misunderstood as Amazon's bid to have their Stranger Things thing. But it was art by Simon Stalenhag, and then it was a really great role-playing game by a Swedish company named Fria Ligan, which translates as Free League. And so I'm excited about those things today. I'm just rambling in case anybody has questions that I need to answer. So I will just ramble on. That's what I do. That's why I chose this career. When I was shifting careers, it's like, what am I good at? I'm good at talking for a really long time, sometimes about nothing. Or nothing important. Okay, I'm going to assume that there are no questions. If my students have questions, you know how to reach me. You've got my email. You've got mail. There's a world that's disappeared. That's a world that is no more. You've got mail. All right. See y'all on Wednesday.